Please welcome Catholic Social Services Board President, Tony Rusili.
Good morning, and thank you for being here and supporting Catholic Social Services. It is my honor to welcome you to this year's Breakfast with Catholic Social Services. We'd like to thank our clergy, our vowed religious, government leaders, sponsors, partners, donors, staff, and particularly our speaker, Sam Quinones, for joining us this morning. At Catholic Social Services, we believe that everyone should live with hope and wholeness. For more than 70 years, we have witnessed firsthand the transformation that can take place when people are equipped with the tools they need to reach their full potential. We believe that when people are able to access the resources they need with a supportive community, they are able to move beyond adverse situations and become strong participants in society. Today, we have the honor and privilege of hosting journalist, author, and speaker Sam Quinones in his book, Dreamland, The Tale of America's Opiate Epidemic. Sam shares the story that is so close to home. Our town, our state are featured prominently in the story, which unravels how we got to this point of the worst addiction crisis in history. As we come together today, Sam's words are going through my mind. The antidote of the crisis is not an oxygen, the medication that treats opioid overdoses. The antidote is community. Today we gather as a community to become more aware, to recommit to being a part of the solution, and to learning what we can do to be a part of the community of hope. First, we'd like to begin with a prayer, and I'd like to invite Sister Nadine Buchanan to come forward and lead us.
Good morning. Let us please place ourselves in the presence of the Lord. Merciful God, your children cry out to you for wholeness, hope, and dignity. Lead your children who are affected by the disease of drug addiction out of the prison that takes away their life. Restore them to the assurance of your unfailing mercy. We pray for all our brothers and sisters who are suffering in any way from the injustices of our world at the hands of others. Change the hearts of those who injure others, and let each one of us be an example of your peace. Merciful God, relieve all of us of our thoughts and fears that keep us from reaching out to those who are most in need of our care and your healing love. Surround us with your compassion so we can truly be in community of hope. We ask for your blessing on the food before us, the friends beside us, and the love between us, as we ask all this through our most merciful God. Amen.
Amen.
And enjoy your breakfast.
Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the President and CEO of Catholic Social Services, Rachel Lustig.
Good morning, everybody. It's so great to see you. I know everybody loves being up and at 'em at 7 a.m., so I'm delighted to see a packed house. And it is my pleasure to welcome you to Catholic Social Services Breakfast with the Bishop. There was a moment where we thought our bishop wasn't going to be able to make it. So Bishop Campbell, we're delighted that you, and grateful that you're able to be here with us this morning. You've been with us for so many years of your tenure, and your support and leadership is something that we've come to really appreciate and support. And I also know that today's topic is quite important to you. So thank you for being here. There are also several members of our clergy, our priests, our deacons, our vowed religious who are with us this morning, and I know that they keep us and our clients in their prayers and in their concerns, so thank you for being here with us this morning. To our elected officials, County Commissioner Marilyn Brown, City Council Member Michael Stenziano, and our very own Columbus City Council School Board Member Ramona Reyes. And to anyone that I may have missed, thank you for your partnership and your support and for being here with us this morning. I also want to give a quick thanks to our platinum sponsors, to Columbia Gas of Ohio, to Kelly Companies, to General Preservation, to Kimball Midwest, and to Mount Carmel Health Systems. Let's give them a round of applause. That's right. We were very honored and blessed to have many gold sponsors, silver sponsors, and patron sponsors. This is the largest breakfast that we have had yet, and I just want to say how grateful I am for your support of our mission. We couldn't do this without you, so thank you so very much. And to the many donors, partners, staff, volunteers, and board members that are with us today, you are the hearts and hands of Catholic Social Services. Thank you so very much for being here with us. Many of you know that I'm a small town girl. I hail from Alexandria, Indiana, where I grew up playing basketball with my 8 siblings and working in the farms with my uncles. While life has brought me to DC and to Santiago, Chile, and to major cities, when this job brought me here, I was thrilled. I was grateful to be back in the Midwest, to be living in Columbus, to be serving the many towns and small cities that form a part of the Diocese of Columbus. Right away, I fell in love with Portsmouth. We're lucky enough to have the St. Francis Center site down there. And our director for the center, Barbara, is a pint-sized powerhouse. She knows everybody and is a force for good in Portsmouth. When I'm down there and we go to the Market Street Cafe or the Port City Pub, we walk in and I'm with a local celebrity, everybody's saying hi. She, on the other hand, is with some questionable character that isn't from these parts. So, my favorite story of working in Portsmouth happened a few years ago. The diocese owned a monastery that had been vacated by a group of nuns, and it left this beautiful, rather large building in the downtown area that wasn't being used. The parishes and CSS were doing great work to help care for poor and vulnerable people, but their many small efforts were far apart from each other. So when we saw that the monastery was vacated, the group came together and said, we could do more if we use this monastery. And so they did, and within a few months, it was up and running. And by the end of the first year, there were already 45% more people who were being served by our communal effort. It was this beautiful experience of the loaves and fishes. We were blessed to have the opportunity to own our site, and so previously, before moving into the monastery, and so Barbara volunteered to help us sell it. It was 2014, and I wasn't that optimistic about making a large profit off of selling a site in Portsmouth, so I thought Barbara trying to sell it for us was as good of an idea as any, and off she went. Several months later, I get a call from Barb telling me that she needed a board resolution in the morning. I had no idea what she was talking about. So I was like, okay, Barbara, why do we need a board resolution in the morning? Well, Rachel, she says, I sold our property and they're ready to take it over. So I just need that board resolution. And I'm like, Barb, that's great. You found a buyer. But this is the first that I'm hearing from it. So to get that resolution, why don't you send me what you have in writing? A couple of seconds later, I hear the fax machine, and this is what comes out. You all may think that I'm kidding. In my mind, I was like, what on earth is this? We're selling a piece of property here. But the first thing that came out of my mouth was, Barb, there's no date on this. So a couple of seconds later, I hear the fax machine and well, there you go. Now it's legal. When the shock wore off, I was kind of able to appreciate what had happened. Matt and Barb, they've known each other for years. They grew up going to the same schools, the same pool, the same hangouts. They know each other's parents, children, and now grandchildren. Barb used to go to church with Matt's mom. Barb's son coaches Matt's granddaughter's basketball team. Their offices have been across the street from each other for years. They know where each other live. They know where each other does. They know each other's people. They've been a part of the same community for a long time. And in that community, they've come to know that they can trust one another. It wouldn't have mattered if it were a lawnmower or a piece of property. They were going to be true to their word, and the community was going to hold them to it. When I picked up the book Dreamland for the first time, I knew that the drug issue was a real problem. At Catholic Social Services, we see this in our programs every single day. Half of the people who come into our Portsmouth site suffer from meth mouth, that severe tooth decay and gum disease that results from abusing methamphetamines. We've lost people in our programs to overdose. Many of our seniors are struggling with children who've become addicts. Their children steal from them or leave their own children for our aging clients to care for. When a small child showed up at our center wearing only a shower curtain, my first reaction was anger. But then I had to ask, what is it that's happening in her home? In Dreamland, the true tale of America's opiate epidemic, Sam Quinones unravels the perfect storm that has brought us to the point of being in the largest drug epidemic in U.S. history, connecting drug companies to addiction studies to Mexican farmers. But the book starts set in a pool in Portsmouth, Ohio, where the community gathered for decades until that community structure broke down as the economy faltered. Using his tremendous skill as a journalist and storyteller, having honed those as a former LA Times reporter and author of 3 acclaimed books, including Dreamland, Sam Quinones has helped to shed light on what caused this crisis and we are honored this morning to have you with us. Sam.
Thank you so much. It's so sweet of you. All right, then. How you guys doing? Everybody good? Everybody turn your cell phones off? I was just having to turn my cell phone. I've spoken 3 times when people have called me during the middle of my speech, and really not a good idea when that happens. It's so great to be here. I had never been to Columbus, Ohio, really never been to Ohio until I started writing this book. And now I'm here almost every week, apparently. I'm here next week speaking. It's a bizarre idea. I mean, when I was writing, I'm speaking to the Supreme Court next week. This is absurd. I'm a reporter, you know, that's it. And I'm stunned. When I was writing this book, this has been an amazing journey for me and for my family. I told my wife, you know, this book is going to fade. This is a mistake. We made a mistake, basically, in signing up to write this book, because this was 2012, 13, 14, right there, because nobody cares about this topic. I mean, really, I'm going around the country and I cannot find anybody. Families are hiding. Obituaries are fabrications. There's a few people who want to address it, and everybody else is like running from it. And now the book came out in April of 2015, and here we are. I'm just blown away. But it's a wonderful thing. It's getting the awareness that it should have received 10 years ago. This problem, nationwide. Of course, it's nationwide. It's the deadliest we've ever had in this country. You know the statistics very, very well in this state, better than probably anybody. But it's killing more people than the entire Vietnam War. And yet, you know, the Vietnam War changed this country fundamentally, and this so far has not quite gotten there, if you ask me. So anyway, Rachel, thank you very, very much. Thank you to the agency. It's really great talking with you folks outside. One of the great things in this job is to, if it's a job, I don't even know what it is actually, is meeting people and talking to them and asking them what brings them out. You know, it's a little mini interview. Whenever you go there, you're going to get a mini interview in about 30 seconds, whatever I can pry out of you. So. Anyway, so today I'd like to talk a little bit about some of what got us here. It's an enormous story, but there are a few things that I think are very important. A lot has been made of, I think it's important to understand that a big part of this was a change in our heroin market. It's very important to understand that if you grew up in the 70s like me, you watched Serpico, French Connection, all that the heroin come from New York. That was how heroin used to be. Most of our heroin came from the Far East, Burma, Turkey, places like that. Crossed 2 continents and an ocean, got to New York, and went to the rest of the country. And what the result was that heroin was very weak and very expensive. Got cut along the way several times. And it meant that the last time we had a heroin problem, we did not really have a lot of deaths because of that. 1980s, all of that changes. The Colombian drug cartels, very fearsome. Underworld FedEx, very effective, efficient. Mexicans not quite there yet, but getting on their way. And they bring in dope from very much closer, and it basically outcompetes the heroin coming from the Far East. So really, since the end of the 1980s, early 1990s, most of our heroin has come from Latin America, and increasingly today, of course, from almost all from Mexico. And that means it gets here very, very cheap and very, very potent, and it's a business. They outcompeted the heroin come from the Far East, and we now have, and that's one of the reasons why we have the heroin problem we have today. I think a lot has been also made of a revolution in pain management. I think a lot of you in medicine are very well aware of this, probably in business as well, where we began to believe at the urging of drug companies and very crucially in all this, pain specialists, that these pills were now, that narcotic painkillers were now virtually non-addictive when used to treat pain. There's no science to back that up. They pushed it as if there were. They began to push the idea that pain should be considered a vital sign, that doctors should need to treat pain the same way they would treat, heart disease, that kind of thing, that it was something that you really had to aggressively attack. You began to see people kind of pushing the idea that these, if these pills are virtually non-addictive, then it doesn't matter how many of these pills we prescribe. So people would began going in for surgeries, routine procedures, 50 million routine procedures in this country, surgical procedures, coming out with huge bottles of pills for pain that's gonna last 2, 3, maybe 4 days max, and then refills and refills after that. We became focused on pain almost above all else. In some cases, this is when you may have seen this, of course, in your daily lives, where the 0 to 10 pain scales, the smiley face, frowny face pain thing, you know that, seen that, right? All of that comes out of this revolution in pain management. But you know what? A big part of that had to do with us. Had to do with us wanting easy, wanting convenience, wanting a quick fix, an immediate fix. And pills did that. In fact, we'd learned that from modern medicine. Modern medicine had been making blockbuster drugs that absolved us of the consequences of bad behavior. So if you eat poorly, well, there's anti-cholesterol, there's Lipitor, there's all these other drugs that told us that we didn't have to pay attention to our own wellness, that we didn't have to be accountable, and we got used to that, I think, as a culture I'm talking about now. We got used to the idea that it didn't, we began to believe we were entitled to a life free of pain. I'm an amateur sociologist, I guess, and I like to believe and think that part of that had to do with the end of the Cold War. We beat the communists. Then we wanted to kind of kick back. World was about to become 100 times more complicated, and we wanted easy, convenience, getting away from complication, and that kind of thing. And pills did that. Pills made it easy. Doctors loved it. Doctors under managed care were having to churn patients through. There's no better way of ending a doctor's appointment than the doctor pulling out a prescription pad. Okay, what do you want? You leave happy because you got your pills. And you want to be fixed and quickly cured, and he leaves, he's happy because you got the hell out of his office. True. We had a revolution that took about 10 years to accomplish. It was very quick. A total change in how we viewed these pills. We went from 1990, the entire world supply of hydrocodone, was in Vicodin, was 3 tons. The entire world used 3 tons of Vicodin in 1990, according to the UN. 2010, entire world supply of hydrocodone was 42 tons, and 99% of that used right here in the United States. Pain management changed radically. This is huge, important part of what happened in our country. Used to be pain management would treat one individual as an individual and design a whole panoply of strategies to deal with that person's chronic pain, usually. Acupuncture, diet, physical therapy, marital counseling. Marriage is pain, right? So seriously, that was prescribed. And you know what? They could do that because insurance companies reimbursed for it. Insurance companies stopped. Pretty soon, doctors who were saddled with this idea, epidemic of pain, you have a mission to cure it, patients demanding to be fixed, not wanting to hear it, looking to doctors like car mechanics. You're my car mechanic, my body's a car, and I'm coming into you, you fix me. And when you tell me, oh, part of your pain is that you drink, you smoke, you don't walk, you don't get any exercise, you don't swim, don't get any exercise, you eat bad food. As a culture, Americans began to say, no, you fix me. Doctors increasingly were faced with this pressure, many pressures from all sides, and equipped with only one tool because insurance companies stopped reimbursing for the other. So pretty soon, all they could give us was pain pills. And that's what began to happen. 96 was a crucial year in all this because that was the year that Purdue Pharma came out with the drug OxyContin, but it was a crucial year because of when. OxyContin was important because of when it came out. 1990s were years when we were going through another revolution in America. That was a revolution in pharmaceutical sales. Before the mid-1990s, most pharmaceutical salesmen, and almost all of them were men, were older guys, gray suits, kind of slow-moving, definitely no hard sell. They shared two things in common. One, they were, almost all of them had a background in medicine or pharmacy. So they knew what they were selling very deeply. In fact, doctors grew to use them as resources. As medicine began to change very fast, they were a reliable source of information, those guys. Also, they were from the community. They were part of Quinones or Chamber, or they were deacons in churches, or they were Little League. They were there for the long haul. They'd been there 20, 30 years, and that was how they cultivated doctors. They got to know them, and doctors trusted them, and they grew to value that. 1990s, early 1990s, we had 35,000 drug sales reps in America. Through the rest of that decade, we saw a sales force arms race, companies hiring more and more and more every year. And by the end of that decade, we went from 35,000 sales reps to 100,000 sales reps. And they were all young people, no background in medicine or pharmacy. They didn't know what they were selling, but they did know how to sell. They were from computer gadget companies, real estate. They had sales backgrounds, not pharmacy, not medicine. They were not from the community. Those old guys were shown the door, and pretty soon it was just young people, all of them good looking, a lot of women, and they didn't know what they were selling, but they did know how to sell, and the way they sold was giving stuff away. It was very, very important that they inundated doctors. It was, one guy says, it was kind of like a cloud of locusts. I had like 12 visits a week, and then went 12 visits a day. I didn't know who these people were, but they were giving stuff away. They knew they learned what they needed to say to sell their product, and they gave away lunch. Lunch was huge. It's really important to understand the importance of lunch, because you come to a doctor's office, you bring lunch for the staff. Pretty soon the staff is on your side, and the doctor is putty in your hands at that point. You know, they gave stuff away. Purdue Pharma came out with OxyContin, and right in the middle of that, they hired 1,000 sales reps. But you know what? They weren't even the largest. I mean, Pfizer had 12,000, right? But they were the only company selling a narcotic in this way. The other companies selling, Lipitor, the blockbuster drugs that they were coming out with, but no one was selling a narcotic, as if it were non-addictive, using very aggressive, almost techniques you'd use for over-the-counter drugs to sell an opiate. First time we'd ever seen that in our country, and they did a great job of that. They were extraordinarily aggressive. Company paid the highest bonuses of any company in the industry before or since. Gave out free coupons. You could get a free coupon for a week's worth of OxyContin. They gave out fishing hats, one to start with and stay with, that kind of thing. He had little calendars. They gave out a CD that I saw on eBay. Swing in the right direction with OxyContin, right? Elderly couple, because they're trying to convince elderly docs to go against what they'd learned in medical school, that they could really very aggressively prescribe these pills, no problem. And on the cover was a couple walking hand in hand through, swing into OxyContin, I'm sure. The CD was, swing band tunes, Woody Herman, Count Basie, Duke Ellington, that kind of thing, because this was part of the promotion. And they were aggressive. They never, ever stopped coming with lunch. And it was a big part of what happened. We ended up, in the end, what happened was marketing worked. Basically, that's what happened. The story is the marketing worked. It just convinced all these doctors, all these pressures on docs, they just went along. Coast to coast. Medical schools began teaching this is the proper way to treat pain. Massive dosing. Doesn't matter. They're not addictive when used to treat pain. Pain's the fifth vital sign now. I mean, all these kinds of bizarre ideas came out of this. Pain clinics all over the place. Excuse me. But you know, we couldn't do this in a vacuum. OxyContin was a game changer because it was what created the terrain for heroin. Before OxyContin, people would mess around with low-dose Percocet or Vicodin, but those drugs have acetaminophen in it, so you can't really develop a raging addiction without destroying your internal organs using that stuff. OxyContin comes out, got none of that, takes people up to very high doses. They begin to look around for, the doctor maybe cuts them off. They begin to look around for an alternative, and they find it in that very cheap, now very potent heroin coming from Latin America. We would not have a heroin problem in this country today of the kind that we do have without OxyContin. OxyContin created the market. We also bears mentioning that we also would not have the kind of heroin problem we have today without the very, very cheap, very potent heroin coming up from Mexico. Those two things kind of combined, and very quietly and very separately. No conspiracy theory here. It's just those two facts kind of combined. OxyContin laying the groundwork, and pretty soon people getting so desperate they would have to go to the black market. We began to prescribe so much of these pills, such enormous quantities, that a black market in pills, street market in pills developed, and people would go there and find the pills were $1 a milligram. Couldn't afford that if you're doing 150 milligrams a day. So they find heroin, and that's basically, in a nutshell, the story of what began to happen. Beginning really, people want to say, well, it happened in 2010 or 11. You know, I met people who were making that switch back in the late 90s, here in Columbus, in fact. Ground zero for all this is right here. I'm sure a lot of you are aware. This famously happens in Appalachia, the Rust Belt areas, but my conception of ground zero is Columbus, Cincinnati, eastern Kentucky, eastern Tennessee, parts of Virginia, all of West Virginia, all of southern Ohio, and parts of western Pennsylvania. That's where it famously starts, and that's what kind of influenced my idea initially as to what kind of book I was writing. I thought I was writing the great all-American drug trafficking book. I've lived 10 years in Mexico. I wanted to write about cartels and all that kind of stuff, and I realized I didn't really care about healthcare, honestly. I wanted to write about crime. But I realized you cannot write about heroin without writing about pills, so I said, okay, fine, that's good. Let's put it all together. I thought it was drug marketing and drug trafficking, one big book. But then by the time I actually got into researching the story, I realized it had spread this problem had spread far beyond Appalachia, far beyond it spread to Delaware here, spread to the suburbs of Charlotte, Salt Lake City, Minneapolis. And what struck me was that our heroin beltways now were some of the best areas of the country, done best in the last 20, 30 years, you know? It was those children, there was family members, not just children, spouses, uncles, whatever, who were getting addicted and dying of drugs used, of all things, to numb pain. And you look at your lives and go, what pain? You know, perfect lives, right? I mean, perfect lawns, you know, SUVs, all that stuff. You know, and it was at that point when I had a kind of an epiphany. I realized I am dealing with a much, much bigger story than I thought I was beginning when I started this thing. You know, it's deeper. It's about, I began to realize it's about who we are as Americans, what we have become as a country. I'm just a reporter, but I could not really avoid certain conclusions. And one of them was that the root of this problem was what we had spent 35 years destroying community in America. We exalted the private sector. Came to believe, beat the communists, came to believe the free market was some infallible God, the benefits of which would be crazy to doubt. We chased factories out of town, gobble up small community banks, began to admire, especially, I think this is important, began to admire wealthy business people, regardless of whether the way they made their money did anything of value, positive, for towns or communities or streets or neighborhoods. We laughed, meanwhile, we laughed at government The place that brings us all together to solve our community problems in a democracy. Inefficient, bumbling, in the way, kind of dull and gray. We had a president years ago who said government is the problem. Now that was a nuanced thing he was trying to get across, but it became interpreted as this is just government is something we need to keep at bay, starve. You know, I was very aware of all that, those kind of. And yet I was in the middle of a story, writing a story of a drug nightmare created almost entirely by the private sector, in certain parts of the private sector. As I was doing this story, I found, because families wouldn't talk to me, I found the only folks really I could figure out, tell me what was going on were coroners, cops, public health nurses, jailers, prosecutors, judges, ER docs, all of whom were earning a government salary. They were the ones fighting this years before all of us kind of became aware of it. Thanklessly, sometimes under threat of lawsuit in some cases. You know, in this story, all profits are private. The Sackler family, which owns Purdue, is now one of the wealthiest families in America, valued by Forbes, famously now at $14 billion due to $35 billion of sales of OxyContin. They're wealthier than the Rockefellers. All costs, as I'm sure you are very aware in Ohio, are borne by jails, coroners, courts, sheriff's offices, county hospitals, police, et cetera, the public sector. But you know, as I got deeply into it, I began to realize this is a bigger story. I began to peel away layers. There was more to it even. I think as Americans, I think really the story gets back to us in very deep ways. It was a time when we began to believe in silver bullets, easy answers, you know, to complicated adult problems. Some of the great founding ideas of America got twisted. Self-reliance, beautiful, wonderful idea, became isolation, everybody kind of just alone, the hyper-individualism. Compromise, you see this in politics all the time, compromise, the idea of bending to the ideas of somebody else became a dirty word. Now the best politician is a politician who never, ever changes his mind. Political correctness came to stifle honest, forthright discourse, seems to me. And 24-hour news, social media, talk, radio created a kind of a tribalism that, again, pushed us into like these isolated little corners. I think as part of that, frankly, as Americans, we developed unrealistic expectations of how much pain we should be asked to tolerate as Americans. We were entitled to a life free of pain. The pursuit of a life free of pain is a big part of what's behind all this. But it wasn't then just physical pain, it was also psychological pain, emotional pain. After a while, pain was not pain, it was disappointment. We came to believe in easy answers to complicated problems. Seems to me that we believe that old rules don't apply to us because we're Americans. This was a fantasy time. These are bizarre examples, but I think they illustrate the point. You know, these were years, you remember, when we thought it was just normal for baseball players to hit more than 60 home runs every year. Happened twice the whole history of the sport. And all of a sudden they're doing it, and we're like, oh, well, they're better athletes now. See? We began to believe, hey, you package up hundreds of thousands of really poorly performing home loans into one security. Standard & Poor's stamps that thing AAA. That's a magnificent place to park all our investment income. And we began to believe that massive, widespread, almost indiscriminate prescribing of narcotic painkillers derived from the opium poppy would not result in widespread, indiscriminate drug addiction. We wanted to have it all, it seems to me. And you know, the pills embodied that. They had the promise of full, complete pain relief and none of the risk because they're non-addictive, right? As part of that, I think, that search for an end to pain at all costs, that pain can never, ever be endured. 11 million people joined the army in the World War II, and every family in America sacrificed to beat the Nazis. And now as a culture, we couldn't even bear to have our wisdom teeth extracted without massive doses of a narcotic. Avoidance of pain, I think, eventually began to morph into avoidance of disappointment, but also it developed into a sensitivity to any kind of offense, whether that offense is intended or not. Too often now, Americans go around searching to be, it's like this narcotic almost, to go looking to be offended on social media and to be able to say on social media, oh, I'm so offended that X, Y, or Z has happened. It's an entire country of Scarlett O'Hara's wilting, you know? Meanwhile, I think I have to say this is crucial in all this, we became ferocious. Excuse me. I'm getting over a case of bronchitis, pardon me. We became ferocious in our attempts to keep our kids from feeling pain. Really, it wasn't pain. It was the consequences of failure. It was disappointment. God forbid that we not give our 14-year-olds, 15, 16-year-olds $800 smartphones, that they be the only ones on their friend group not to have an $800, oh, the pain. You know, we gave out trophies to all these kids on every sports team had to give out trophies. Every kid, God forbid a kid not feel the disappointment of not being the most valuable player. Part of all this exaltation, I think, of the private that really began to develop in the 80s and very strongly in the 1990s, exaltation of the private, we developed a fear of the public sphere. Terrified of letting kids go outside, hovering over them, bubble wrapping them against any possible disappointment. Fear of skinning their knees or who might be lurking outside. Do you know in this country, it's a sad thing to say, but parents have been prosecuted in this country for letting their kids go to the park alone. I have to say, I think that's connected to this issue. Two worst words, I think, in the English language are play, date. It's like scheduling business meetings for 7-year-olds, for goodness sake. I mean, it's just a disaster. It's a disaster. You know, when I was growing up, I grew up in Southern California, where I still live, and my mom was from Iowa. She had a farm bell. Every afternoon, she'd come to the sidewalk and ring that farm bell. That was the sign for all her 4 boys to run home for dinner, right? Pretty soon, everybody on the street was like, damn, I think it's time for dinner. Sam's mom's ringing the bell, you know? Why did she do that? She did that because she didn't have a clue where we were. That's the truth. But the other truth is this. The one place she knew we would never be is inside the house on a sunny Southern California afternoon. Now I go back to that same street, it's not far from where I now live. Been there 6 or 8 times the last few years. I have yet to see one single solitary human being on the street where I grew up. The park around the corner, equally vacant. Atlantic Monthly wrote a great story a while back about kids who grew up in an era of hyperprotection from physical pain were now demanding to be protected from painful ideas as well. Natural result of all this, I think. They were demanding trigger warnings. I didn't know what a trigger warning was until I read that story. It turned out trigger warning is the warning that a professor is now kind of encouraged to give his college students in advance of the class, warning them of disturbing ideas that they may encounter in the class. But you know, that's why you go to college, man, to get disturbed. I mean, there's nothing wrong with it, and I went to Berkeley. It was extraordinarily disturbing. I loved it. I don't know what the problem is. You know, as a culture, meanwhile, we acted as if private consumption, began to think this was part of it as well. Private consumption, accumulation of stuff was a path to happiness. We built into our suburbs a deep, penetrating isolation, and we call that prosperity. That's what we should be aiming for. We embrace technology that really miraculously connects us with the world in a lot of beautiful ways, but also leaves us ignorant, I think, about the guy across the street, you know. I could say as a reporter, we are deluding ourselves as Americans and pretending that we are somehow informed by 24-hour cable news. 24-hour cable news is just like heroin. Same way that heroin addicts, when they get addicted, they all kind of glom together and they don't want to talk about anybody else, just want to talk about people who know about dope, where to buy dope, how to use dope, blah, blah, blah. Very boring. That's what 24-hour news has done to our body politic. It formed us into these little bubbles isolated little bubbles where we talk to people who think like us, look like us, talk like us, and the only time we're talking to anybody else when we're sniping at them on social media. John McCain, one of the things he said before he died, I thought was beautiful, was he said, stop listening to the bombastic loudmouths on radio, on television, on the internet. To hell with them. They don't want anything done for the public good. Our incapacities are their livelihood. Heroin's the same way. Heroin is based on our incapacities as people and as communities. As a result of all of this stuff that I've been talking about, I began to realize that we're all, I believe, we're connected to this to the story of opiate addiction in America. As a result of all this and much, much more, we became isolated, very, very dangerously separate from each other as Americans. That's in poverty or in affluence. It's not so much an economic story. This is about isolation. It's about kids no longer playing in the street, parks being underused. We feel pain from opposing ideas. Why then do we wonder that heroin is everywhere? Seems to me our very search for painlessness, for convenience and comfort, what led us to this point. I began to read a lot about the philosophers, about how we as human beings achieve happiness. Turns out most of them agree, meaning in life, purpose, some passion to follow. Working hard towards being great at something, sacrificing a lot towards that goal. In that process, we develop a fulfillment that is happiness, and that is most often achieved in community with others because we are essentially social beings. Seems to me that that's what heroin is telling us, that we lack. In nature, nothing exists alone. That's what Rachel Carson, the great environmentalist, said. Yet, as Americans, in so many ways, we behaved as if we could exist alone, as if we were entitled to exist alone. That heroin rages across our country, now fentanyl, of course, is perhaps the final expression of that deluded conviction that we can all go it alone. But so too, is our abandonment of small town America, the hollowing out of our economy. We destroyed so many community-based banks, made banking into some sexy, high-flying profession, when really it should be boring, basically, grounded in Main Street, neighborhoods, our little leagues, and our churches. Heroin, it seems to me, is the final expression of values we've fostered in this country for 35 years. Final expression of our fetish for the private at the expense of the public. For isolation at the expense of community. It's the final stuff. Heroin is the final stuff for a culture that believes buying stuff, buying things, consumption is somehow a path to happiness. Remember, heroin turns every addict into a narcissistic, self-absorbed, solitary, hyper-consumer. That's what a heroin addict is, a hyper-consumer. A life that finds opiates turns away from family, from friends, from old activities, devotes itself entirely to self-gratification by buying and consuming one product, and that product is the drug that most makes being alone not just okay, but preferable. Isolation is heroin's natural habitat. I believe more strongly than ever, therefore, that the antidote to heroin is not naloxone, it is community. You want to keep kids off heroin? Make sure people in your neighborhood do things together in public. Get outside, be with others. Make your kids ride their bikes. Let them skin their knees. That's good for them. We got away from that, from what's best about this country. That's what this epidemic is telling us. We rid ourselves of things so essential to us as human beings that they literally have no price, and we have therefore been invaded by cheap junk. And heroin's what you get when you do that, Today, supply of opiates on our street is so vast, so scarily potent, that getting into treatment can take months. And getting out is like Russian roulette. It is so deadly. One of the most dangerous things you can do in America today is get out of treatment for opiate addiction. Football is now a gateway to heroin addiction in in this country. That's an amazing thing to say, this all-American sport. But that's what happens when you start as a culture believing in easy answers and silver bullet solutions to complicated problems like human pain. Fentanyl, a drug that should have been, there's a wonderful drug when used in very limited circumstances, surgical procedures and so on, has been discovered now by the underworld and by the internet, and is now revolutionizing the drug trade in many ways. It's being added to cocaine, being added to meth, being added to marijuana. Anything you use now can turn you into an opiate addict. The good news in all this, finally, is that there is no solution. We tried the solitary solution, right? There's this whole story about trying one thing for everybody. Pills for every human being's pain. A jail cell for every addict. Look where it got us. This epidemic, I think, need to look at it as what it is calling on us to do, and it's calling on us to change a lot about how we think and how we have lived up to now. One of the things it's also calling on us to do is stop believing that there's an easy way out, that old rules don't apply, that we don't have any need for each other. No, there is no solution. There are many solutions, plural. Each small, each part of a mosaic, a kind of a community of solutions, and I'm happy to say none of them is sexy and not one will do the trick alone. That's healthy, that's good. Each is small, has to be tinkered with, improved, some discarded, who knows. Each, however, grows from immersion, deep immersion from all of us in this problem and from communities working together. That's how innovation always happens. That's how innovation happens on the shop floor. Foreman, worker, accountant, executive, the computer software engineer, all working on a problem little by little, making changes to how the product is made. And in the end, small incremental changes, you've got a better made product. I don't see why a town, in this issue, why a town or a county is much different. Seems to me we ought to rediscover that great American self-reliance and realize, ironically, that self-reliance requires depending on each other. No one just goes it alone. That's a myth. Watching out for each other. But you know, that is what is exhilarating about this epidemic right now. That is happening all across, quietly, all across this country. It's a beautiful thing to watch, and I know because I've been there. In my speaking, I've been to all kinds of places all across, and everywhere I go, it's the same thing. First of all, parents are coming out of the shadows. Obituaries are telling the truth. Their faces are being lent to the idea that this is addiction. Everybody can be addicted. But also, one of the most beautiful things is watching county after county after county. I go to task forces, collectives, collaboratives, working groups, whatever you want to call them, they're forming. They're bringing together a wide variety of people who never, ever thought they'd have a role in fighting a drug scourge. Not just cops, not just public health, clergy, doctors, recovering addicts, college presidents, mechanics, Chamber of Commerce, Kiwanis Club, all these different groups coming together. It's a wonderful thing to watch happen, and it is leveraging talents, leveraging energies, coming together in a beautiful way. It's happening quietly. One of the most beautiful things about it is it's happening organically, too. Nobody did a pilot project and came up with a 10-point plan for how every county needs to do this. No, every county I've been to just started it on their own. It's beautiful. People coming together. It sounds so Pollyannish, I know. It's easy to be cynical in our world today. So much of our world teaches us that cynicism is wise. That's what 24-hour news is teaching us every damn day we have it on. That really nothing can be accomplished. But that's heroin talking right there. That's not American. It's interesting, I think, that the convener in all this is most often government. Not that government has all the answers. I lived in Mexico during the last years, the one-party state. I know what bad government can be, right? But it's folly, too, to believe that government is the problem. Government can't do things without the private sector, clergy, schools, et cetera. But government is the forum through which communities are coming together to solve this problem, and it's a beautiful thing to watch. I hope, though I know many of you are in business, I'm hoping part of this response will be that you will begin to consider hiring recovering addicts. Such an important role you play in doing this. Because what you find is recovering addicts, when they actually are given a second chance, become enormously grateful, enormously energetic, and become enormous boons to your business, but not just to your business, to your community, to your streets. They are refreshed, liberated from dope, energized. So if you're in business, please think about considering to hire people who have big gaping holes in their resume. But it's not just your bottom line. Again, it's that your street, your town, your schools. So if you all, among you, I'm talking to today, are looking to get involved in this, I urge you to do so. This is something that cannot be solved by cops and public health nurses alone. Find those local groups that are forming in your town, in your county. They're everywhere. This state has a ton of this going on right now. Get to know someone you don't already. Add your voice, your perspective, your expertise. There's a lot of it in this room right now. But remember too that this process is messy. It's not perfect. It's not the single silver bullet answer to everything. It's messy. It's really what it is. It's a groping for answers. We're all half blind. I think we need to revel in that. Be excited by that fact that we don't have something solving all of our problems, which never actually really existed. And that through collaboration with each other comes innovation. Collaboration, that's what America so often, particularly in social policy, has gone too long thinking it could do without. We thought we could just work like this always. It has such potential when it's unleashed, and that is why, finally, I believe this epidemic is actually one of the great forces for change in America. It's a lacerating catastrophe, but it is also, we need to view it as an enormous opportunity for change in this country, because that's what it is. In an age characterized by abuse of the most isolating of all drugs, we are seeing Americans come together. It's beautiful. Breaking down those debilitating silos that kept us apart, not worrying about those political partisan differences that 24-hour news says are so important. Understanding that it is through reliance on each other, through community, that which we've done so much to destroy, that we will most likely find our way out of this storm. Remember, though, as you do get involved in these various endeavors to fight this problem, that you are fighting something even bigger than widespread drug addiction. You are combating the real scourge of isolation, of fragmentation in our culture today in America. So let's be patient with each other. It took 20 years to get here. People are upset, well, the numbers don't go down. Yeah, it took 20 years to get here. Be patient. Let's be patient with each other. Be patient, too, I have to say, with elected officials. Let's not demand miracles from them the way we demanded miracles from doctors who were then just forced to give us pills because they don't have really any miracles to give us. And remember, as you get involved in this, that your efforts probably will not be recognized the way they should, because real change happens piecemeal. It's not sexy, it's incrementally, like on the factory floor, and piecemeal doesn't really make the evening news all that much. But if you do get involved in the ways I've discussed, find those groups, lend your expertise, leverage your talents, I believe that one day your towns will thank you, your counties will thank you, your country will thank you. And I want to say thank you all very, very much.
He is pretty phenomenal, isn't he? Sam, seriously, thank you for what you've done. I mean, I don't know that any of us could have figured out how all of these pieces came together, and we find ourselves in a very serious issue where This is hitting so close to home for us. And you didn't just lay out what happened, but those values pieces and call to community are so critically important. And I'm so grateful for what you've done. Thank you. I do believe that this issue can seem extremely overwhelming. When we look at all of what's causing it, it reminds us, though, that we have to come together, that we can be community, and that we only are going to be able to do something about this if we solve it as community. I know that social service agencies like Catholic Social Services have been on the front lines of this for a long time. When an addiction hits a member of the family, the whole family and community suffers. Children, aging parents, they lean on our social services infrastructure in the way that they would have leaned on their addicted family member. We see this. But we are also in a really unique position as Catholic Social Services because we're not just a social service agency. We are also a proud part of the Catholic Church. And the churches are going to be an essential and important and relevant part of the solution too, even when we haven't been the best example. As the abhorrent acts that have happened in Pennsylvania and otherwhere have reminded us. But a situation a couple of weeks ago reminded me of just how essential it is for us to get back to our best self. I was at my parish, and we were at our weekly prayer group. And each week we would end that session by going around the table and by asking one another, what is your intention? What can I pray for you for? And then we would commit to praying for each other for the rest of the week. One week, a woman finally shared that concern that she had been hiding on her heart, that cross that she had been bearing. Her daughter was in the throes of her addiction, unable to hold down her job, making dangerous decisions, stealing from her mother, shirking her responsibilities. You could hear the pain in this mother's voice, the shame and concern and inadequacy, her heartbrokenness and her love. And in that room, she got hands and hearts opened to her. People stepped up to carry the load. They offered their prayers as a way of telling her how much they cared for her, to say, you are not alone in this. When we come together, we make it harder for addiction to happen. Sam, that statement that you said, a life that finds opiates turns away from family and community and devotes itself entirely to self-gratification. The drug that makes being alone not just right, but preferable. When we come together, we make addiction that much harder for that to happen. And when we have the opportunity to learn from the love that God has for the Son and that God has for each of us, we remind each other that we can be that love to somebody who's struggling with something this serious, to remind them that you are loved. And what better expression of community can that be? And it's in that tradition that Catholic Social Services does its work. Taking that love that God has for all of us and sharing it with people who are poor and who are vulnerable. One person, one family, one neighborhood, and one community at a time. Meeting people where they are, helping them to imagine a new future and get the support that they need to overcome it. Whether it's an addict, a mother fleeing domestic violence, a new immigrant building a better life for themselves, an aging neighbor struggling to care for themselves, or now their children and grandchildren, or a community like Portsmouth or Columbus. We're there, bringing hope and dignity to all, anyone who's in need, regardless of faith and background, helping seniors live independently and families stabilize and thrive. But don't take my word for it. there are a few people who know much better than I do. I'd like for you to hear their story.
You know, when you get older, sometimes people forget about you. They talk a lot about how lonely they were before I came and how much they loved me, and I tell them how much I love them. But it keeps them going, too. They have something to look forward to. I thank God for Catholic Social Services. I've been in it for 10 years. And I just love it.
My brother was killed instantly by a drunk driver. And our mom, she died a year and a half later. I lost my dad to Parkinson's disease. After 22 years working for a company, one day they walked in and said, "Thank you, and here's your final paycheck." I had a shopping problem, which put me in a lot of debt, dealing with anxiety and dealing with stress. My mom always said, when you're in trouble or in need, always go to church. And that's when I needed Catholic Social Services. It's helped me tremendously. It's helped me deal with the pain of the losses. It's gotten me back to the person I was.
It just kept escalating. I'm really afraid of what he's going to do. I had told my daughters, let's go to the store. And I took them and we went to the police station. My case manager had referred us to Catholic Social Services. And that's kind of where it started. I just really needed the second chance. That was one of the darkest moments, and it would have been so easy just to give up. It was harder to walk away than it was to stay. I couldn't do it anymore. With Catholic Social Services, we were able to get into an apartment, and I was able to hire an attorney, file for my divorce. Without them, I probably would have went back, probably would have been hurt way worse, or he would have killed me. I've maintained my job through this. My girls are still in school. I've been able to re-enroll in school myself. It's been a hard time. It's been a hard time. But looking back at it now, it turned into one of the best outcomes I could have asked for. This support has made the world of a difference to me and my kids. It was nice to know that people still care. That meant everything.
We're here as foster grandparents to help extend education from the kindergartens up to the 6th graders. It's just extra help, extra direction, and it lets us continue to be part of the workforce at a volunteer level where you continually give love. The children are more respectable to us as foster grandparents. They call me Pawpaw. It is a great feeling to be part of this. Wish we had a foster grandparent for every classroom.
Nací en una de las provincias centrales.
I grew up in central Cuba, and then I traveled to Costa Rica and became citizens here in Ohio. Her retirement was very low. She only receives $152 in food stamps. At the Guadalupe Center, she can get oil, bath soap, laundry detergent. What she saves in those items, then she can actually buy the meats. The Guadalupe Center helps providing legal services and other activities. Little by little, it all helps. The Guadalupe Center helps Us immigrants,
En realidad nos sentimos como familia.
the Guadalupe Center treats her very well, and in reality, they treat her like family.
You know, you got to give a huge thanks to people like Cleo and Darlene and Sarah, James and Nelson, because it takes a lot of courage to share your most vulnerable moment. And as we learned in this opioid crisis, when you can put a face not only on the tragedy, but on the triumph, you can remind people that things are possible, that change can be made. A few weeks ago, I got the chance to see this up face to face. Normally at Catholic Social Services, it's my team that does the hard work. But we had the honor and privilege of being able to help out one of our sister agencies who was working on the border in McAllen, Texas. And they were on the front lines when separated families were reunited. And what happened was they were reuniting the families and dropping them off at a bus stop with the clothes on their back, travel documents, and a court date. This Catholic Social Services sister agency of ours had a team of about 5. So the director is a good friend of mine, a sister, and she reached out for help. And as I do with just about what any religious nun asks, I was like, absolutely, sister, what can I do? So we sent a team down to the border to help out. And when our team director, Ramona Reyes, who's the director of our Guadalupe Center, called me while we were there, and you know it's not good when you get a call from your staff at 6:30 in the morning, but she called because one family, a mother and her 5-year-old daughter, who were flying from McAllen to Connecticut where their family was living, had for some crazy reason had a layover in Columbus. And those of you who travel frequently know that Columbus is not a 24-hour airport. So when their flight was delayed and they landed at midnight, they were kicked out of the secure region in order to come back for their flight at 6 a.m. So at 4:30 a.m., when they tried to go back through TSA didn't recognize their paperwork and wouldn't let them back through. In fairness, their paperwork looked a lot like Barbara's property sale document. So Ramona called to see if I could help them out. By the time that I was there, the work was pretty simple, and it afforded us the opportunity to just sit down and have a cup of coffee. She told me about why she left Honduras, how she was worried for her 5-year-old daughter's life, and that's what made it worth it for her to travel with them across that treacherous terrain. She told me about the detention center, how she was there in a room with dozens of other women, how she didn't know where her daughter was, what it was like to finally learn that her daughter had been taken to Florida. And when she did finally get 2 phone calls with her, the 5-year-old didn't understand what was going on and would only cry on the phone. But in that moment, over that cup of coffee, that story seemed like it was a world away. And while I know Maria and her daughter are gonna have to work through some of the trauma, in that moment, 2 adults helped a 5-year-old girl learn how to write her letters. And then when she was done, we kind of smiled while she did somersaults around the room. And in that moment, I got the grace to see the power of the human spirit, the power of hope that drives so many people who turn to us in need. That's what Catholic Social Services has the honor to be able to do. And so it's to Maria and Cleo and James and people like Sarah and Nelsa that I want to make my contract. And I want this community to hold me to it. That I, Rachel Lustig, promise to lead CSS to the best of my ability. But I can't do this by myself. I need the help of everybody in here. And so I ask you today, what will your contract be? What's your role? Now, we unfortunately don't have cocktail napkins at your door, on your table, but there are some envelopes. Many of you include supporting Catholic Social Services as a part of your contract. Please accept my sincerest apology. Thank you. It's terrible. For the generous way that you entrust your time and your talent and your treasure. We could not serve 30,000 people without you. For those who are new to CSS or who have more to give, I'd like to encourage you to consider doing that. Please consider giving us a gift of $100 this morning. For some of you, that's a lot. Others could do more. But please take a minute and consider that. Know that your $100 will provide counseling to people struggling with mental health, like Darlene, provide supportive services to help a senior remain in their home, to care for their grandchild, like James, provide a safe haven for a domestic violence survivor and their children, like Sarah, provide food for the hungry or a hot meal at our St. Francis Center in Portsmouth, help a new immigrant, like Nelsa or Maria, build a new life. Be the community for someone who's lost hope. Thank you for taking the time this morning to learn more about Catholic Social Services. Thank you for learning more about our work and the issues that we are working to combat in this community. And may you go in peace to love and serve one another. Thank you.